After 13 years having a primary residence and being a homeowner, at the end of this month, we are going to get a long-term renter here in our primary residence, and we are going to only be renting. We're not going to have a primary residence for a period of time. And I wanted to talk to you about why that will be the best choice for us for a period of time. And in general, people often have the question of when it makes sense to rent versus buy. And honestly, it's very rare that it makes sense to rent rather than to buy. But I wanted to go through when it does make sense. So if you or someone you know happens to be in that situation, you can realize that that's what's in play. Or you can realize, hey, more often than not, that's not the situation, and you really should be buying a primary instead. So, hey guys, I'm Adrienne Green. I love to talk about all things with wealth building and real estate investing. And so, first, let me tell you why at the end of the month, we're going to become renters. And the reason is that we are leaving the town that we've been in for the last 3 years, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we are going to go be like digital nomads, no home base, traveling for 15 months, possibly longer. We'll see how it goes. All right, so the first few months we're going to do some domestic travel, and then we're actually going to spend a year abroad. One of the reasons for that, or one of the bonuses, I guess, is we're going to take advantage of the foreign earned income exemption, FEIE. So if you are thinking about wanting to live abroad, check that out. It's a great tax benefit to living abroad. And so because we are going to be moving quite frequently, it really doesn't make sense for us to buy a place in these situations. The longest we're going to be in any one place is probably 6 weeks. Maybe if we love a place, we'll stay, 2 or 3 months. But really doesn't make sense to deal with buying a place when you're moving every 2 or 3 months. Also, again, we're going to be abroad for the bulk of this time that we're traveling. And I'll make another video about the nuances of investing in real estate abroad. Just realize the Cliff Notes version of that is it's a little more challenging as a US citizen to buy property in other countries. And because of the loan options available or not available, it's often not as lucrative because you often are not putting, 20% down or something like that. You're often doing 40, 50, or even 100% payment as in all cash. And so you're not getting the benefits of leverage. That's the Cliff's Notes version. But for us, we're going to be traveling for 15 months, maybe longer, and not staying in any one place for a very long time. So it really makes sense for us to just do short-term rentals as we do this. So with that, let's get into when does it make sense to rent versus buy. And I really think there's only a couple situations, maybe we could get a third in there when it would apply. The first is when you won't live somewhere that long. Generally, we're looking, it can vary based on the area, but generally we're looking under 2 years. And this is the part people often overlook, it won't make sense to keep the property as a rental after that. So let's dive into this and into what it means. So first, if you're going to live in a property for less than 2 years, you might think, oh, well, the cost of selling it at the end, right? The fees, the taxes, etc., are going to outweigh any gains that I might have. Well, that depends on the appreciation and things like that. But the other thing that people often don't think about is, well, what if you just kept the house as a rental after you did move on? And why would we want to maybe buy a house as a primary residence and keep it as a rental when we do move on? Well, the reason we would want to do that is because it's a lot easier and cheaper to get a conventional primary residence loan, like I'm going to live in it, than it is to get an investment property loan. So when you are going to live in a house, you are often able to maybe put very little down, like a 3.5% FHA loan. There are even often 0% options like a VA loan or other state-specific loan programs, incentive programs for people. So you can often get into a house for very, very little down versus when we're looking at an investment property, we're looking at typically minimum 10, often 15, 20, 25% down. So you're able to get your foot in the door in an investment property with a much, much smaller down payment. That's why we like the idea of buying something as a primary residence and then keeping it as a rental in the future. So that's where I'd say, even if you're going to move on within a year or 2 years, if it makes sense to keep it as a rental after that, then maybe you still want to pull the trigger and it'll make sense. Now, when does it make sense to keep it as a rental? Well, we often look at two things in terms of a real estate investment, right? Cash flow and appreciation. So that's what I would suggest you look at when you look at a house or the market where you live in is, if you were to buy a place, let's look at cash flow. What would your payment be? Your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, right? What would it cost you every month? And you're going to save some money for fixing it up. You're going to save some money for repairs, right? You're going to use a property manager. You got to figure some percentage going to that. What would your outflow be versus what would the rent be? And if there's a notable difference there and you look at what your down payment is and how much money you'd get every month in rent, and if you'd get that cash flow, that would be one consideration for if it would make sense to keep it as a rental afterward. The other consideration is appreciation. So let's say this property was just going to break even. It wasn't going to cash flow at all, right? It would cost you to use $1,500 a month to maintain this house in market rent in a year or two when you move would be $1,500 a month. There's a little aside there, guys. People often look at today's market rent. You got to look at what market rent's going to be when you rent it because it's probably going to be higher, right? Numbers are going to be better. But even if you broke even on that rent, what is your market historically appreciating at? And so some markets are really big cash flow markets. Some markets are really big appreciation markets. Some markets are hybrid where they get a little bit of both, but not a ton of either one, right? So when I first started investing in real estate, it was in Northern Virginia, which is kind of a high price market, and it is much more of an appreciation market than a cash flow market. So if we looked at some cash flow metrics like our cash on cash return or things like that, it wasn't fabulous, and yet they ended up being great investments for us because we got a lot of appreciation and we didn't need the cash flow at the time, so it worked well for us. Now, since then, I've invested in other markets like Chattanooga, and it's a hybrid market, so we maybe don't have quite as crazy appreciation, but we do have much more cash flow on our properties, so that works out well. So I would say measure any potential primary residence that would be a rental based on those two metrics to determine if it would be good to keep it as an investment after you move. And often, now it depends on what loan you get, often you can buy a primary residence once every year, and they understand that life changes and you can get another primary residence loan in another year. We're not trying to mess with the system here or take advantage of it. And yet, if you are living in some place and it is your primary residence until you outgrow it or move, it is a valid use of a primary residence mortgage loan. That is how you should be using it. So it's, I think, well within the requirements there. Now, the second situation where it might make sense to rent versus buy, and these are pretty rare, is when it is a better deal to rent than to own. We can get this. When I lived in Southern California about 15 years ago, that market was this way, where it was so expensive to buy things, and you could instead rent from somebody who'd bought things a while back. And so their mortgage payment, their costs were a lot lower. So they would actually rent a place for less than, or they would offer for rent, a place less than your mortgage payment and maintenance expenses and everything like that would be if you were to buy a place today. That was something we ran into a lot there. And so there's a couple things that I would look at if you think that you're in a place where it's better to rent than it is to own financially. First is, like I said, that monthly cost. What would your monthly cost be to own than it is to rent? Now, there is a consideration with the monthly cost to own. You are paying yourself. You're paying down that mortgage, so you are building equity that you can then, that's increasing your net worth, right? So you want to consider that as well. And so you want to kind of back out what you're paying to your own net worth. But there's a consideration there of what's going to cost you more every month. And then the second thing is the money you'd spend on the down payment. Could it get a better return elsewhere, right? Let's say you are putting 3.5% down for an FHA loan or a 5% down conventional loan. Is that market appreciating? And are you going to get a great return on that money? Now, often, and especially on a primary residence, that case is yes, right? Because if we take something like, we say a house is going to get, general U.S. appreciation is like 4 to 6% annual appreciation, right? Well, that means that if you bought $1 million house, it's going to go up $40,000 to $60,000, right? But if you only put 5% down, you put $50,000 down, which you can't do on $1 million house, but that's okay. These are easy numbers. When you get that 5% appreciation, that's 100% because of leverage or the money multiplier on the money you put down. So when you have these small down payments that you can do with a primary residence, it often means because of leverage that you're getting a really outsized large return on that investment. So that is another calculation that I would say that you look at. If you're thinking about buying, you're talking to a lender, you're seeing what percentage down can I do, and you're saying, okay, well, what's this market here appreciating? And you do that calculation. So if we were to use smaller numbers, let's say for ease, you buy a $100,000 house, 5% down, you put $5,000 down. It appreciates 4 to 6%. Let's just take the middle 5,000. That house goes up to $105,000 in 1 year. You put $5,000 down, you have an asset that went up $5,000. You doubled your money in 1 year. That's the power of leverage, and that's what can be so powerful with a primary residence and a smaller down payment. So those are some things to consider. And so I hope if you are renting right now, you take the time to sit down and do a little bit of math here and see if it makes sense, right? So first, even if you're not going to be somewhere that long, even if you're going to be there under 2 years, think about, will this property make sense to keep as a rental after that? Because if so, you can really get your foot in the door to real estate investing at a very, very approachable down payment with a primary residence. And then 2, if you think you're in an area in one of those rare situations where it's a better deal than to rent than to own, do the math. Look at what your monthly cost would be. And when you do that, consider what you're paying yourself back on your loan, your mortgage loan. And then 2, calculate what return you'd get on the money you put down and say, would it be a great deal or would my money make more money somewhere else, right? If you're in a market that's not appreciating and you are buying that $100,000 house for $5,000, but in a year or 2 years or 3 years, it's still only going to be a $100,000 house, that's a less compelling argument to buy, right? So you have to look at the specifics for your specific area and do the math for your specific numbers. If it makes sense to buy, I have a network of agents throughout the nation that are great working with investors. So please reach out. One of my services that I provide free of charge to you is connecting you with investor-friendly agents in any market in the United States. And I'd be happy to help. If this video was helpful, please make sure to thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to learn more about building wealth and investing in real estate.